May 12th, 1940, dawned over the French countryside with an understated serenity, a quiet that seemed at odds with the tension building along the
We must push the panzers through
Meuse.
here before the reserves arrive.
From the vantage
terrain
points
favours the
overlooking
defender,
the river,
Heinz.
French soldiers
cost us
observed a
dearly.
landscape that had not changed in generations: green fields, rolling hills, and small villages nestled along winding roads. Yet within this familiar setting, the mechanics of war were in motion. Units were repositioned, artillery recalibrated, and engineers inspected, bridges in preparation for the inevitability that would come with the morning light. There was no spectacle, only the deliberate rhythm of preparation, a quiet accumulation of small, precise actions that would determine the outcome of the day. On the German side, two figures quietly shaped the course of what was to unfold. General Heinz Guderian, orchestrating the coordination of armoured columns, and Overran Rommel, ensuring the timing and mobility of reconnaissance units. Diaries from officers described the morning as methodical, almost ordinary in its execution. Maps spread on tables, reports checked and verified, units given precise instructions. The human experience was both concentrated and measured. Soldiers and commanders understood that the success of the advance across the Meuse relied not on a single act of heroism, but on the careful orchestration of hundreds of interdependent movements, each contingent upon the last. Engineers prepared pontoon bridges, testing sections for stability and noting the depth and current of the river. Infantry units moved into position, maintaining spacing to reduce vulnerability, while tanks were staged behind cover, ready to provide suppressive fire. The landscape itself, the river, surrounding forests, and open fields, became a participant in these preparations. Environmental factors influenced decisions at every level: where bridges could be built, which routes armoured columns could take, and where infantry could establish footholds. Soldiers recorded in their diaries the careful observation required to navigate these conditions, blending tactical awareness with the quiet discipline of sustained readiness. Across the river, French artillery crews maintained vigilance. Guns were repositioned to cover the most probable crossing points, while observation posts sent intermittent reports regarding enemy movement. Officers adjusted firing tables based on the changing light and terrain, accounting for both known positions and potential approaches. The human dimension of these actions is subtle but central. The stress of anticipation, the effort to maintain attention over extended periods, and the quiet awareness that a single miscalculation could carry significant consequences. Each soldier's effort, though seemingly routine, was critical to the larger operational framework. The anticipation was not marked by overt panic or cinematic tension. Instead, it manifested as a persistent, measured alertness. Soldiers observed patterns in enemy movement, noted changes in terrain conditions, and prepared responses to potential contingencies. French units attempted to reconcile confidence with caution, aware that the river offered both a defensive advantage and a vulnerability. Letters and journals from this period describe the tension as an undercurrent, a constant, measured awareness, rather than a sudden spike in emotion. Human endurance, discipline, and observation were the defining characteristics of this moment. Guderian and Rommel coordinated closely with armoured and reconnaissance units. Reports from scouts guided the timing of movements, while communication with artillery units ensured that covering fire would align with advancing columns. Soldiers later recalled the meticulous precision of these preparations, the repetition of drills, and the quiet concentration that permeated every action. It was not the drama of immediate combat that defined the morning, but the methodical accumulation of factors that would make the river crossing inevitable and the advance unstoppable. The Meuse itself reflected this duality of calm and latent tension. Its waters mirrored the morning light while concealing currents, depth, and potential obstacles. Soldiers observed its banks with careful attention, noting areas suitable for bridges and fording, while engineers tested materials and anticipated load-bearing limits. Civilians in nearby villages watched from a distance, sensing movement without fully comprehending its significance. The interplay of natural geography and human action was central to the day's unfolding events, shaping every decision, observation, and action. French rearguard units conducted sporadic patrols along the banks, checking fields and hedgerows, while artillery adjusted firing positions based on intermittent intelligence. Soldiers moved deliberately, balancing the tension of observation with the routine of duty. Every decision, from adjusting gun elevation to repositioning an infantry unit, reflected both human judgment and environmental awareness. Diaries from this period convey a quiet resolve, the recognition that the outcome of the day would emerge from the cumulative effects of careful, repeated actions executed under sustained pressure. As morning progressed, reconnaissance units confirmed the readiness of German armoured columns. Engineers completed final adjustments to pontoon bridges, and infantry prepared to step onto the first sections of river crossing. Tanks and artillery coordinated coverage, ensuring that every element would support the next. The pace was deliberate, measured, and disciplined, reflecting the understanding that success depended not on speed or spectacle, but on precision, timing, and cohesion. Soldiers' awareness of their role within a larger framework underscored the human dimension of operational planning, individual action intertwined with collective consequence. By late morning, subtle movements signaled the imminent crossing. German units tested the riverbank, adjusting positions and ensuring stability. French observers noted these actions, but could not yet fully predict the scope or timing of what was to come. Officers and soldiers on both sides experienced the convergence of preparation, environmental awareness, and operational pressure. The landscape itself, the river, fields, and villages, served as both obstacle and canvas for human action. Reflection on this period emphasizes inevitability. The crossing of the Meuse would occur not as a moment of surprise, but as the natural culmination of preparation, coordination, and human endurance. Chapter 1 establishes the foundational context for the events of Day 3. The audience observes the meticulous preparation and measured anticipation that precede decisive action, gaining insight into both the operational and human dimensions of conflict. The narrative emphasizes calm inevitability, illustrating that the course of history is shaped not only by dramatic engagement, but by sustained, disciplined, and interconnected human effort. This subtle hook engages curiosity, grounding viewers in the lived experience of soldiers and officers on both sides of the Meuse, setting the stage for the unfolding consequences of the day's advance. Perfect, Mohammed. I'll now write Chapter 2. The crossing begins. 1,000 words, in calm, immersive WW2 diary style, fully ready for text-to-speech narration. Chapter 2. The crossing begins by midday on May 12, 1940. The German preparations along the Meuse had reached their final stages. Engineers had tested pontoon sections. Infantry units had assumed positions, and tanks were staged behind cover, poised to provide suppressive fire when necessary. The river, calm and reflective in the morning light, now stood as the axis around which the fate of armies would turn. Yet the crossing itself was not a sudden act of violence, but a gradual, methodical operation, grounded in discipline, observation, and human endurance. German engineers carefully guided the pontoon bridges into position. Every step was deliberate. Planks were checked for stability, anchors tested against the current, and spacing adjusted to support the weight of successive infantry and armour waves. Soldiers later described the repetitive yet vital nature of this work, emphasizing that operational success depended on the precision of such incremental actions. Each movement was informed by reconnaissance reports, the understanding of the river's currents, and coordination with covering units positioned on higher ground. The crossing, in this sense, was a choreography of human effort executed under constant scrutiny and measured risk. Infantry units approached the riverbank with quiet focus. Spacing between soldiers, timing of movement, and coordination with engineers reflected a disciplined understanding of tactical necessity. Each man carried the weight of both equipment and responsibility, aware that hesitation or error could compromise the entire operation. Diaries from German soldiers highlight the mix of anticipation and concentration. There was no theatrical tension, only the quiet pressure of performing tasks correctly, under continuous observation. The crossing depended on repetition, coordination, and human judgment as much as on technology or firepower. French artillery observed the developing scene with growing unease. Guns were adjusted to cover the most likely crossing points. Observation posts reported every subtle movement along the riverbank, and forward units attempted to identify weaknesses in the advancing forces. Officers relied on human observation to anticipate enemy actions, while soldiers positioned along hedgerows and fields maintained vigilance. Yet the calm, measured advance of the Germans challenged both the reliability of intelligence and the speed at which French units could respond. The river crossing, though initially subtle, became an inevitable pressure point in the unfolding conflict. As the first pontoon sections were secured, infantry stepped onto the bridges. Engineers reinforced the structures behind them, ensuring that each successive unit could follow safely. Tanks provided cover from concealed positions, their presence a stabilizing factor rather than a spectacle. Soldiers later recalled the sense of continuous momentum, each crossing contingent upon the preceding one, each unit dependent on the precision and vigilance of those already in position. Human effort, coordination, and endurance defined the pace, illustrating that operational breakthroughs are as much the product of methodical labor as of firepower. French defenders attempted small-scale countermeasures. Artillery fired intermittently, targeting engineers and infantry, while limited infantry detachments moved to disrupt bridging efforts. Yet the cumulative efficiency of German preparation and discipline gradually overcame these obstacles. Soldiers noted the tension of performing under enemy fire, maintaining composure while executing tasks that demanded precision and repeated effort. The crossing of the Meuse was not a singular dramatic moment, but the convergence of environmental awareness, human decision-making, and operational coordination. The Meuse itself played an essential role. Its currents, depth, and banks influenced every tactical choice. Engineers adjusted pontoon placements, infantry moved along secure paths, and tanks followed terrain favorable for both speed and cover. Soldiers observed the subtle interplay of nature and human activity. The river as both barrier and facilitator, a variable that could neither be ignored nor rushed. Diaries from both sides emphasized this constant negotiation, underscoring that the crossing's success emerged from preparation, observation, and repeated, disciplined effort. By mid-afternoon, German infantry had secured footholds across the river. Engineers continued to stabilize bridges, allowing armor and supplies to cross. Tanks moved forward, suppressing potential threats, while reconnaissance units reported back to command. Soldiers later described a sense of quiet inevitability. The crossing was unfolding exactly as planned, a cumulative result of preparation and human coordination rather than luck or sudden action. French positions, stretched thin and increasingly compromised, began to lose their coherence. The human experience of both sides reveals a shared tension. French soldiers faced the challenge of defending under the cumulative pressure of enemy preparation and persistent movement. German soldiers balanced the exertion of labor with the vigilance required to maintain discipline across units. Diaries, letters, and memoirs highlight the centrality of endurance, attention to detail, and disciplined action. Each step, each adjustment carried consequence, and the momentum of the operation relied on this quiet but intense human focus. Civilian observers, when able, noted the subtle yet inexorable advance. Villages along the Meuse saw columns of soldiers crossing, tanks moving in coordinated formations, and engineers working with quiet efficiency. The landscape bore the imprint of human labour and strategic planning. Roads marked by movement, fields partially trampled, and riverbanks reshaped by bridging efforts. The human dimension of the crossing extends beyond combatants, emphasizing observation, adaptation, and reflection within a broader historical context. By evening, the Meuse crossing had achieved operational significance. German forces were established. On the far bank, bridges stabilized and supply lines secured. French defensive positions had been compromised, forcing units to regroup or withdraw. Soldiers on both sides experienced the cumulative result of disciplined labor, endurance, and careful observation. The crossing was complete, not as a sudden act of triumph, but as the natural consequence of methodical preparation meeting environmental reality. Chapter 2 demonstrates the gradual, disciplined execution of the Meuse crossing, emphasizing the human, operational, and environmental factors that determine success. Viewers understand that military outcomes emerge from coordinated effort, endurance, and repeated decisions rather than isolated acts of heroism. The narrative maintains calm, reflective tension, providing a foundation for the next chapter. The escalation of German momentum and the subsequent collapse of French defences. By the afternoon of May 12, 1940, the consequences of the Meuse crossing were becoming increasingly apparent. German forces, having secured footholds on the far bank, began to exploit gaps in the French defensive line with methodical precision. This collapse was not sudden or chaotic in cinematic terms, but inevitable, a product of cumulative operational pressure, stretched lines, and the limitations of human endurance under sustained stress. Soldiers on both sides experienced the subtle but pervasive shift. The French army was losing cohesion, while German momentum continued, disciplined and relentless. French officers worked to reorganize units under difficult conditions. Infantry that had retreated from exposed positions attempted to regroup. Artillery units were repositioned to cover emerging gaps, and communications teams scrambled to re-establish contact between isolated detachments. Soldiers moved through the fields and roads with cautious determination, aware that each step might place them in range of enemy fire. Diaries and letters from this period reflect a mixture of fatigue, frustration, and professional focus. Men were compelled to adapt to a situation that had outpaced initial expectations, their actions a reflection of human resilience rather than dramatic heroics. German infantry, supported by tanks and artillery, advanced in a coordinated manner. Engineers cleared obstacles, reinforced bridges, and maintained supply lines, ensuring that the pace of the advance remained uninterrupted. Reconnaissance units moved ahead to identify weak points and suitable crossing locations, reporting back with information that guided tactical decisions. Soldiers later described the operation as a series of deliberate, interconnected movements, each step contingent upon the last. The collapse of French defences emerged from the pressure exerted by consistent, disciplined human effort, executed with precision over hours and across difficult terrain. Small French rearguard actions attempted to delay the advance. Patrols harassed German columns, temporary roadblocks were erected, and artillery targeted advancing infantry. These efforts, though earnest, could only slow progress. They were unable to reverse the strategic momentum established by the Meuse crossing. Diaries note the tension of these engagements, the effort required to act effectively under pressure, the awareness of vulnerability, and the psychological strain of sustained defensive action. Each unit, each soldier, contributed incrementally to a broader effort, but the cumulative operational advantage lay with the German forces. The landscape itself shaped the unfolding events. Rolling hills, forests, hedgerows, and small villages influenced both movement and defensive positioning. French units relied on natural cover, while German engineers assessed terrain to optimize routes for armor and infantry. Soldiers on both sides adapted to the physical environment, adjusting speed, spacing, and formation in response to the constraints and opportunities presented by terrain. Diaries emphasize this negotiation between human action and geography. The collapse of defenses was as much a response to environmental factors as it was to enemy pressure. Civilian populations observed the shifting front with anxiety and caution. Families fled or sheltered within villages, noting the passage of troops and the subtle indicators of advancing forces. Fields bore the marks of movement, and roads were crowded with vehicles and soldiers. Letters and memoirs describe a quiet tension. Daily routines were disrupted, yet life continued through adaptation, observation, and resilience. The human experience of the collapse extends beyond the battlefield, illustrating how strategic outcomes are reflected in social and environmental contexts. By late afternoon, key French positions had been bypassed or weakened. Artillery emplacements were increasingly exposed, infantry units struggled to maintain cohesion, and communications remained fragmented. Commanders faced difficult decisions about whether to hold, withdraw, or reorganize under pressure. Soldiers described a mix of fatigue and resolve. The recognition that the operational collapse was gradual but inevitable, shaped by sustained enemy action and the limits of human endurance in complex circumstances. German forces continued to consolidate positions. Engineers repaired roads and bridges damaged during the advance. Artillery provided covering fire for infantry, and reconnaissance ensured that flanks were secure. Soldiers later reflected on the quiet intensity of these operations. Continuous, disciplined effort, focused observation, and repeated adjustment of tactics defined progress. The collapse of French defences was not a singular event, but the cumulative result of methodical coordination and relentless human effort. The Meuse region itself bore witness to the consequences. Rivers, fields, and villages were transformed by movement, occupation, and combat. Tracks of armour, displaced earth, and abandoned equipment marked the operational footprint, while civilians navigated the altered landscape with care. The narrative emphasizes the human experience. Endurance, observation, and adaptation were critical to survival and operational effectiveness, shaping how individuals on both sides understood the unfolding events. By evening, the full significance of the collapse became clear. French units had been forced to retreat to secondary positions, officers assessed remaining defensive capabilities, and soldiers contended with exhaustion, dislocation, and uncertainty. German forces, maintaining momentum, had secured strategic points, ensuring continuity of supply and communication. The front line was no longer static. The dynamic of advance and retreat had shifted decisively. Soldiers on both sides reflected on the role of preparation, coordination, and human effort. The operational outcome was the result of incremental, disciplined action rather than dramatic, isolated incidents. Chapter 3 establishes a reflective understanding of how French defences gradually gave way at Sedan. The audience observes the human, operational, and environmental factors converging to produce the outcome, gaining insight into the inevitable consequences of strategic pressure. The narrative emphasizes calm inevitability, illustrating that collapse in warfare is a process shaped by preparation, coordination, and sustained human effort. With positions eroding and momentum firmly in German hands, the stage is set for the next chapter, the consolidation of gains and the unfolding consequences for both soldiers and civilians. In the days following the crossing of the Meuse and the gradual collapse of French defences, German forces moved steadily across the northern French countryside. The advance was deliberate, disciplined, and marked by a quiet, methodical rhythm, rather than sudden, dramatic engagement. Columns of infantry and armour progressed through open fields, forests, and small villages, while engineers repaired roads and bridges to ensure the continuity of supply lines. Each movement, though seemingly routine, contributed incrementally to the broader operational success, highlighting the cumulative effect of coordinated human effort under sustained pressure. French units, retreating from the Meuse, attempted to consolidate secondary defensive positions farther west. Infantry reorganized, artillery was repositioned, and communications teams worked to re-establish contact across dispersed units. Soldiers faced the dual challenge of enduring both physical strain and psychological stress. Fatigue from continuous movement, tension from the knowledge of advancing enemy forces, and the pressure to maintain cohesion under rapidly changing circumstances. Diaries and letters describe a persistent awareness of vulnerability, tempered by the necessity of professional discipline and human resilience. On the German side, General Guderian and Rommel continued to coordinate the operation with meticulous attention to timing, spacing, and logistical support. Armoured columns moved in concert with infantry units, engineers prepared roads and bridges for subsequent movement, and reconnaissance elements scouted for obstacles and opportunities. Soldiers later recalled the quiet intensity of the advance. Each day, each hour, and each movement demanded careful observation, precise execution, and sustained coordination. The success of the operation relied on the aggregation of countless, individual actions, each dependent upon the others. Villages along the route bore witness to the advance. Civilians observed from windows or fled to safer areas, noting the movement of soldiers and vehicles, the sound of machinery, and the subtle reshaping of familiar landscapes. Houses were temporarily repurposed as billets or command posts, roads, crowded with columns of troops and supplies, and fields marked by the tracks of armor and transport. Letters and memoirs emphasize both the disruption and the quiet adaptation required. Life continued alongside the machinery of war, with communities negotiating safety, routine, and survival amid the advance. French rearguard actions attempted to slow the German momentum. Small infantry detachments harassed supply lines, artillery fired intermittently, and roads were temporarily obstructed. Yet these efforts, though earnest, only modestly delayed the advance. Soldiers described the tension of performing under sustained pressure, balancing the imperative of resistance with the practical limits imposed by terrain, fatigue, and dispersed forces. The advance, in contrast, maintained its disciplined pace, highlighting the cumulative impact of preparation, coordination, and endurance. The geography of northern France played a central role in shaping operations. Rolling hills, forests, rivers, and villages influenced both the movement of troops and tactical decisions. Engineers assessed road quality and bridge stability, adjusting routes for armor and supply. Infantry units used natural cover for concealment, while artillery maintained observation from high points. Soldiers on both sides described the environment as both a challenge and a facilitator. The terrain dictated action as much as human decision-making, underscoring the interplay between geography and operational outcome. By mid-afternoon, German units had secured footholds in several strategic towns, reinforcing positions and maintaining lines of communication. Engineers repaired bridges, artillery units were advanced to support future operations, and infantry maintained vigilance along flanks. Soldiers reflected on the continuity of effort. The advance was sustained not by sudden heroics but by repeated, coordinated action, with each individual contribution feeding into the operational whole. French forces, stretched thin and increasingly pressured, sought to adapt by consolidating remaining positions and attempting to restore communication and coordination. The human experience of both armies reveals parallel narratives of endurance and adaptation. German soldiers described the rhythm of movement, the repeated tasks, and the quiet satisfaction of achieving objectives through disciplined labor. French soldiers recorded fatigue, tension, and the necessity of constant vigilance, adapting to the relentless pace imposed by an organized and methodical opponent. Civilians navigated disrupted villages, returning cautiously where possible and adjusting routines to accommodate the presence of soldiers. These intersecting experiences emphasize that historical outcomes are shaped as much by human effort, observation, and adaptation as they are by strategy or weaponry. Artillery and air support were present but secondary to the fundamental rhythm of the advance. Their use was calculated and precise, reinforcing objectives without dominating the landscape or narrative. Soldiers' diaries highlight the reliance on repeated, coordinated effort rather than dramatic displays. Success depended on meticulous attention to timing, positioning, and environmental conditions. Human judgment, endurance, and sustained labor were the determining factors in the advance across the heartland. By evening, German forces had consolidated positions, repaired infrastructure, and secured towns along the route of advance. French units had withdrawn to secondary lines, regrouping where possible, and attempting to maintain a coherent defense. The landscape reflected both movement and consequence. Roads marked by tire tracks and footprints, villages partially occupied or abandoned, and fields showing the imprint of armor and infantry. The advance, though lacking in cinematic spectacle, demonstrates the power of cumulative, disciplined human effort, shaping operational success. Chapter 4 underscores the inevitable momentum following the fall of Sedan. The narrative emphasizes human endurance, operational discipline, and the interplay with environmental factors, illustrating that advances in warfare are realized through careful coordination and sustained effort rather than dramatic events. Viewers gain a reflective understanding of how small, repeated actions accumulated into strategic success, setting the stage for the final chapter, Aftermath and Reflection, where consequences for soldiers and civilians alike are examined with calm, reflective attention. The days following the advance across the northern French heartland brought with them a mixture of quiet recovery, reflection, and operational consolidation. The immediate battles had receded, leaving a landscape transformed by movement, labor, and conflict. Roads were marked by the tracks of tanks and supply vehicles. Fields bore the impressions of infantry columns, and small villages bore witness to the passage of armies. Soldiers, officers, and civilians alike moved through this altered terrain, interpreting the consequences of strategic decisions through lived experience rather than spectacle. For French forces, the collapse of the Meuse line and subsequent withdrawals required careful reorganization. Units regrouped in secondary positions, artillery was repositioned, and command structures attempted to re-establish communication across dispersed detachments. Soldiers carried the weight of fatigue, the tension, of uncertainty, and the responsibility of maintaining cohesion amid retreat. Letters and diaries from this period reveal both practical adjustments and subtle reflections, the human dimension of endurance, judgment, and resilience in circumstances that exceeded individual control. German forces, having consolidated their footholds, shifted focus to the methodical maintenance of momentum. Engineers repaired roads and bridges, artillery units recalibrated firing positions, and infantry secured towns and supply lines. Soldiers' accounts highlight the steady nature of this work, the repetition of tasks, and the continuous observation required to maintain operational cohesion. The human effort was constant, emphasizing that historical outcomes emerge not from singular acts of heroism, but from sustained, coordinated labor executed with precision and discipline. Civilians face the consequences of occupation and movement. Families cautiously returned to villages, assessing damage to homes, roads, and farmland. Communities adjusted to new rhythms, defined by both fear and practical necessity, salvaging possessions and attempting to re-establish routines. Observers noted both the physical and psychological adjustments required. The landscape reflected the imprint of conflict, yet life persisted through adaptation and quiet resilience. The human experience of aftermath extended beyond the battlefield, highlighting the interconnectedness of operational decisions and civilian life. Artillery positions, previously central to defense or advance, were recalibrated for oversight rather than immediate engagement. Forward observers monitored both terrain and human movement, reporting continuously to command units. Soldiers reflected on the shift from active combat to sustained vigilance, noting the continuity of responsibility even when immediate confrontation had subsided. This period illustrates that operational success is as much about endurance and methodical oversight as it is about dramatic engagement, and that human decisions continue to shape outcomes long after the initial action. The Meuse River, a focal point of earlier operations, remained both a geographical and symbolic marker. Its banks bore the traces of engineering work, infantry movement, and the quiet labour of consolidation. Civilians and soldiers interpreted the river as both boundary and connector, linking prior defence efforts to ongoing operational success. Reflection on its role emphasises the interaction of environmental factors with human decisions, underscoring the inevitability that the outcome of conflict is shaped by terrain, preparation, and disciplined effort. Within French units, the aftermath prompted assessment and reflection. Officers analysed both successes and failures, evaluating positioning, preparation, and human endurance under pressure. Soldiers recorded moments of exhaustion, observation, and adaptation, acknowledging the cumulative weight of decisions made in rapidly evolving circumstances. Diaries highlight a quiet resolve. Even when operational outcomes were unfavourable, the human capacity for discipline, judgment, and resilience remained central to the lived experience of the campaign. German soldiers, likewise, engaged in reflective observation. Diaries and memoirs describe satisfaction in achieving objectives through sustained effort, awareness of the discipline required to maintain momentum, and recognition of responsibility in the execution of orders. The narrative is not one of spectacle or dramatized triumph, but of disciplined achievement. Success emerges from coordinated, repeated action, executed by individuals aware of their interconnected roles within a larger framework. Civilians. Narratives provide complementary perspective. Letters describe careful returns to villages, adaptation to occupation, and reconstruction of daily life. Roads, homes, and fields bore witness to the events that had unfolded, while communities negotiated safety, routine, and survival. The human experience emphasizes that history is not merely a record of armies and strategy, but a living process shaped by those whose lives intersect with conflict. Reflection and adaptation characterize this period as much as operational or military decisions. By the end of this phase, the strategic significance of Sedan was clear. The fall of the defensive line had reshaped operational momentum, morale, and subsequent strategic planning. Yet the narrative remains calm and reflective. Outcomes were the product of continuous, deliberate action rather than sudden shifts in fortune. Soldiers, officers, and civilians experienced the consequences of movement, retreat, and advance as part of a continuum of cause and effect, illustrating the interplay between preparation, coordination, and human endurance. Chapter 5, therefore, provides both conclusion and reflection. The audience is invited to consider how methodical preparation, disciplined coordination, and human resilience determined the course of Sedan and its broader significance in the campaign. The narrative emphasizes inevitability over dramatization, illustrating that the outcome of war emerges from accumulated, deliberate, interconnected actions executed by individuals operating within complex circumstances. By tracing continuity from initial preparation through crossing, collapse, and advance to aftermath, viewers gain a comprehensive understanding of both operational and human dimensions, concluding the documentary with a calm, reflective perspective on one of World War II's pivotal early events.